I'm honored to bring to you today a warrior in the litigation jihad, in lawfare. We know that our court systems are being used to impose the Sharia. We know that our court systems are being used to impose the blasphemy laws under the Sharia, restriction of freedom of speech under the guise of hate speech. I have been represented by, I believe, two of the foremost lawyers in the world in combating and fighting the Sharia, Robert Muise and David Yerushalmi. They represented me in the $10 million lawsuit filed against me by Rivka Barry's parents that threatened her when she had left Islam because I hurt his feelings. I did hurt his feelings. 2 years, okay, and hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is how they silence people. This is how they bankrupt people. And they represent me pro bono. Robert Muise represented me, along with David Yerushalmi, against the city of Dearborn when they were running ads proselytizing for Islam. Come to Islam. Why Islam? And I ran ads, leaving Islam? Is your family threatening you? Is there a death threat on your head? And they wouldn't run them. And we sued, and Robert and David won. Of course, the ads didn't run because they filed an emergency motion as if the judge was going to reverse herself the same week. But I have to tell you that the week that those ads were supposed to go up in Dearborn, it was the week that Jessica Mokdad was honor murdered. They're representing me in New York City. You know, New York City subway system is running anti-Israel ads to end U.S. aid to Israel. Well, we submitted our pro-Israel ad that said, in any war between the civilized man and the savage, you side with the civilized man, support Israel, defeat jihad. Those ads were rejected because savages hurt their feelings. Yeah. But these are serious cases, and I applaud Robert Muise, and I applaud David Yerushalmi and the work that they're doing for American law for American courts, the foreign law prohibition that, if I understand, is here in Michigan. It's HB 4769 and SB 701. You got to get behind this, ladies and gentlemen. You've got to get behind this. I mean, take an active role. And by the way, very, very briefly, when they tell you that, oh, we're not going to be able to get married and we're not going to be able to, again, it's deception. Unlike Jewish law, there is no compulsion in Jewish law. There is no compulsion in Christian law. Jewish law is for Jews. Canon law is for, you know, Catholics, for Christians. But the Sharia is a comprehensive legal system that asserts authority over non-Muslims. It is different. And frankly, we need this. We need these laws, and there should be absolutely no reason why anyone would oppose, you know, the fundamental constitution liberties that are, you know, our unalienable rights. So I'd like to bring up Robert Muise so he can better inform you of the fight on the legal front, because it's critical. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you all for coming. It's what a terrific turnout for a Sunday afternoon. That's a great, I think, testament to the incredible work that Pam and Robert are doing in this area. You know, I served 13 years on active duty in the Marine Corps, and it was my and I think it's important to give you a little bit of my background. You know, as a Marine officer, you take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I was an infantry officer. I served in the First Persian Gulf War, and it became pretty clear to me that we have perhaps more domestic enemies to our Constitution than we did on foreign enemies. So I decided to go to law school. I went to Notre Dame. I got my law degree, and I've been now fighting these battles for our Constitution in the courtrooms for the last 12 years. For good or ill, this battle for America is occurring in the courtrooms. I'm going to cover some of that here today during my presentation. Pam mentioned my colleague, David Yerushalmi. David and I have been doing cases together for 4 years, some of the more complicated, complex cases in this battle space fighting Sharia. And we decided this past January to join forces and launch the American Freedom Law Center. and to enter into this battle space and to bring in expertise that I don't think exists anywhere else. And we've had some incredible success during our short time and over the years that he and I have been working together. And I want to cover some of those cases with you here today, because unless you hear these facts, you'll think that it never took place here in America. But I can guarantee you that we have domestic enemies to our Constitution, and those battles are raging every single day. What I want to talk about today, I describe it as civilization jihad, a threat to life and liberty. Because in civilization jihad, under Sharia, we don't have there's no Republican form of government. There's no freedom of speech. There's no free exercise of religion. There's no due process. There's no equal protection. In fact, as we've been hearing, women are chattel under Sharia. You know, I'm a father of 12 children. As I like to say, all of them are boys except for 10. So blessed are you among women in my house. And when women are treated like chattel, that affects me in a very personal way. You know, I'm proud to say, even though we've launched in January, already this left-wing British organization, they did an international report, and they've already identified the American Freedom Law Center, highlighting it as one of the top U.S.-based organizations that campaign against civilization jihad. You're damn straight. And they also identified my colleague, David Yerushalmi, as one of the top 12 threats to the civilization jihad. And they said he's arguably done more than anyone to fight civilization jihad. You know, the New York Times this past summer did a full-page story on him, front page, above the fold, described him as the man behind the anti-Sharia movement. And he is. And I'm very proud to have him as my colleague. No, this civilization jihad, it certainly has a kinetic component, as we saw on September 11th. You know, it's amazing to me when I talk to so many groups and they say, well, what's the concern? You know, the threat's over, right? Didn't we just hear from our administration that there's no longer a war on terror? I mean, what does it take? You know, these Sharia adherents to fly planes into our buildings and kill 3,000 innocent Americans before America wake up? But there's another form, stealth jihad, using a term that Robert Spencer has coined, that is as equally as pernicious, as equally as harmful. And it's occurring, and I see it more so in the courtrooms and in the cases that I'm dealing with, and I'm going to run through some of these. But I want to cover this thing real quick, a study on U.S. mosques. This was a study that was co-authored by my colleague, David Yerushalmi. It was published in perhaps one of the most reputable terrorism peer-reviewed journals, Perspectives on Terrorism. And they did a study of U.S. mosques. And this is what the conclusion was. 80% of U.S. mosques provide their worshipers with jihad-style literature promoting the use of violence against non-believers. This is a legitimate peer-reviewed study. This threat to our freedoms is a real threat. It exists. And when I use the term civilization jihad, it's not even my term, that's their term. That's the term that was coined by the Muslim Brotherhood. This is what they said in the explanatory memorandum on the general strategic goal for the group. This document that is quoted here was actually submitted as evidence by the Department of Justice in the largest terrorism financing trial that's ever been held in the United States, the Holy Land Foundation trial. And this is what this document says. The process of settlement is a civilization jihadi process. The Muslim Brotherhood must understand their work in America as a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers so that it is eliminated and God's religion is made victorious over all other religions. Those are their words. And as a footnote, one of the unindicted co-conspirators in this trial was CARE. And when CARE filed a motion to get their name removed from the pleadings, the motion was denied through every level of the courts because there was sufficient evidence presented at trial that they should have been named as an unindicted co-conspirator. Now, why they weren't indicted co-conspirators, we'll have to leave that question. You'll have to ask that question to the Department of Justice. Civilization jihad is their words. It's not something that Robert Spencer wrote in a book or Pam Geller put on her blog. This is what the Muslim Brotherhood is saying. We all know what our apologist in chief has been saying and what he said in 2009. He wants to hide the fact that we have a real threat. It's threatening us today. It's threatening us both through violent jihad and through more stealthier forms, stealth jihad or civilization jihad. Let me tell you about some of the cases. The case that David Wood was telling you about, I had the privilege of being the attorney that represented him in that first criminal trial. David went to the Arab Festival with 3 other Christian missionaries to peacefully preach the gospel on the city streets. And as he indicated, they went there in peace, and they left in handcuffs. They spent a night in jail. Thankfully, they had videotape and video cameras where they could capture what actually took place. And I'm going to show you a 4-minute clip of live video of what transpired on that night during the Arab Festival in 2010.
Can I eat this falafel? Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
What's up?
What's the problem?
I have no problem.
Is that why?
I have no problem with Muslims.
Then why are you making all those videos? Why are you trying to make us look bad?
I'm not trying to make you guys look bad.
The man on the right in the red shirt is Nabil Qureshi,
When we made the video last year, we made it explicitly clear that it was the security we had an issue with. Not everyone at the festival, it's security. Then we put up a video afterwards saying, we want to make this perfectly clear. We don't have any issue with the people there. We have no issue with the people at booths. We only have issues with people at security. So I got no issue with you guys. None at all.
But you didn't say that in the videos. I know you're saying the Islamic people as a community are just all bad. And are all asking for trouble.
My mom is Muslim. My dad is Muslim. My sister's Muslim. All my cousins are Muslim. I love Muslims. I got no problem with the Muslim community. It was the security guards here that we made the video with.
So you came here looking for trouble with the security guards?
Why'd you decide making all these videos?
That's a good question. We came here last year, and we saw a pamphlet that we had a question about. So we went to the booth who gave us the pamphlet, and we said, "Hey, can we ask you a question about this?" And they said yeah. They said yeah, you can ask a question.
I don't understand. I didn't see you at like the Spirit Festival
So why
or
are
like
you
the
here
Arab
another year in a row?
I just happened to be here last year.
If
It
last
was like
year
my first
went
time
bad,
here.
why are you here? Why are you here again?
Because we want to see if it's going better this year. We wanted to see if it's better this year than it was last year.
Are you sure about that?
I'm
pretty sure it's the other way around. I think you're looking for more trouble.
We're not looking for trouble. We want to see things are better. And generally, things have been better. Security hasn't been hitting us. Security hasn't been assaulting us. So things are better. I'm glad about that. And we're talking right now, and no one's stopping us from talking. So I'm glad about these things. This is the very reason I'm here, to make sure you and I can talk.
So you're here to preach?
I would like to preach. We haven't even gotten to that point
So
yet.
preach to me then.
Preach to you? I would love to preach to
Why
you.
is Christianity better than Islam?
Because Jesus Christ did not claim to be just a prophet. He said he was here to receive worship. He did receive worship. He forgave people's sins. He miraculously healed people. He died on the cross and rose from the dead. These truths have changed my life, have absolutely changed my life. And I find it so important to let people know about these things that I will tell anyone and everyone who will listen. So I'm glad you asked the question.
Why is it Allah isn't like that either? Why is there more than one Bible?
Why is it Allah? What makes Jesus better than Allah?
Who? Okay, I got a bunch of you guys who are asking questions.
I got a question for you.
So did like 4 of these guys. I want
You're saying a human?
When was
So-
Jesus decided God?
What?
When was Jesus decided as a God?
That's an excellent question.
325 years after the Roman consul declared him as God.
No, people are worshiping Jesus as God less than a decade after his death.
That's not.
How could Jesus be a God if he came like any of us came out of a woman? He came like any other man comes out of a woman. Yeah.
So in the Old Testament, we see a prophecy saying that a child will be born to you and he will be the mighty God. So in the Old Testament, it actually says the mighty God will be born as a child to you. And in actuality, it can't just be like a half God. It actually says the everlasting Father, Aviad, will be born to you. So this is a prophecy we knew would happen.
Right, but how does God die? You said after his death he was proved to be God.
That's an excellent question. What we find in the New Testament is that in order for God to take our sins away from us, he can't just wave them away. If God were just to wave away sins, he wouldn't be a just God. So he takes our sins upon himself. He says, all right, I can't just wave these sins away. That wouldn't make me a just God. I'm going to pay those sins for you. That's how much he loves us. And so he comes into the world as a man, and he takes our sins for us. He does it all voluntarily. He doesn't have to do any of this.
Have you met Jesus yourself?
Say again?
Not that.
These are great questions, guys. I'm loving this. Anyone else have a question? Yeah.
Where in the Bible says, can you find in the Bible where it says, when Jesus says, I am God, worship me?
Well, in the Bible, when people...
I'll give you $100 in any Bible. There's 80 of them. If you find me...
Okay.
There's 80 Bibles, but there's only one Quran.
Let me...
They changed it.
Where were you going to talk?
Okay.
Where's the microphone from?
Are you legally allowed to take this microphone?
Let go of the microphone.
Are you legally allowed to take
this? Yes. Let go of the microphone.
Okay.
That microphone that Nabil Qureshi had didn't amplify sound. It was simply for the video recorder. So that conversation was normal voice conversation on a city street. That is quintessential First Amendment protected activity. I mean, in fact, that was about as peaceful as one of the witnesses testified during the trial. It was almost like a classroom session. Nabil was taking peaceful questions from these Muslims who had very good questions, and he had very good answers. And what was his crime? Breach of peace. Again, I had the privilege of representing all four in the criminal trial in Dearborn, and after a week trial, that video is what I showed in my closing argument. And after I showed that video, I turned to the jury and I said, did what you just witnessed there, what you just saw, did that happen in a city street in the United States of America? Thankfully, they were all acquitted. And David Yerushalmi and I, we turned around, we drafted a 96-page civil rights lawsuit. We sued the mayor, we sued the city of Dearborn, we sued 17 police officers, we sued the chief of police, and we sued 2 Arab Festival workers. And that litigation is ongoing. I like our chances. Here's a case many of you may not know that much about. In fact, this was a case where David and I started working together back in 2008. How many of you out here realize that you are the primary shareholder of AIG? The federal government owns 92% of AIG through taxpayer dollars. AIG also happens to be the world leader in Sharia-compliant financing. And I'll tell you a little bit about Sharia-compliant financing, but first with AIG. When things were going awry in the in our economy back in 2008, the feds gave AIG $85 billion in loans. Shortly after that, we passed the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act, a congressional funding statute, where we then gave them $40 billion, which replaced some of that $85 billion. And then that following April, we gave them another $30 billion. The first $40 billion came in November. Around December, AIG announced to its shareholders through a press release from its New York office that it was now opening up its Sharia-compliant businesses in the United States. At the same time, the Department of Justice was having an Islamic Finance 101 seminar for all its policyholders back in Washington, D.C., lauding all the benefits of Sharia-compliant financing. Under Sharia-compliant financing, they can only invest in things that are Sharia adherent, that promote Islam. In fact, AIG, meaning you, the federal taxpayers, hires a Sharia advisory board, which is made up of these imams who make determinations of how the money should be invested. A certain percentage of that investment, the profits, has to come off as a zakat, a religious tax. And those religious tax can only go to fund pro-Islamic charitable organizations. It has to be purified. Organizations such as the Holy Land Foundation. Many of these organizations promote Hezbollah and Hamas. So you, as federal taxpayers, have given $70 billion in tax money to prop up and to own AIG, and now you have the sovereign engaged in not only a religious practice, which violates the Establishment Clause, but a religious practice that has national security concerns. Over a year's worth of litigation and discovery, once we filed this lawsuit, the Department of Justice immediately filed a motion to dismiss. And we defeated that. In fact, the judge's ruling was phenomenal. It was a very courageous ruling. So we had a year to conduct discovery and to prove our case, and we did. In fact, we showed at a minimum $153 million of federal tax money going directly to those businesses. Surprisingly, the federal judge who ruled in our favor the first time around, it was almost like a different judge had written the opinion. He actually said in his opinion, $153 million out of $70 billion, well, that's de minimis. De minimis? Can you imagine $153 million going to a Catholic school? I just argued this case before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit last Friday. We drew a fairly hostile judge. In fact, one of the judges said, "Well, this is just like a public school serving fish on Fridays for the Catholics." It's nothing like that. In fact, the Department of Justice attorney who argued against me on the other side kept referring it to as Sharia law. Well, we got about a year before a decision will come down in that case. And I can tell you one thing. After deposing some of the top-level Treasury officials who are responsible for this entire bailout of AIG, the federal government has no clue where their money went. No clue. And one of the problems here is AIG uses what's called consolidated financing, meaning all the money goes into one pool and it's all commingled, and yet there's no restrictions on any of your taxpayer money going to pay the salaries of these imams, who, by the way, some of them are pretty bad actors. One of them, his dad is fairly notorious as being someone who's called for a violent jihad against the West. Well, he's on the taxpayer's payroll working for AIG among these other imams. I guarantee you that zakat money is not going to go to the American Freedom Law Center and help support any of the work that David, Ure, and Shami and I are doing. But you as taxpayers now own 92% of AIG, and you're funding all this with your money, $70 billion worth. Here's a case that really bothers me personally. Jesse Nieto, he was a Marine. A Marine, did 2 combat tours in Vietnam, a retired Marine gunnery sergeant. He retired sometime late in 1980. He then began working at Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune in North Carolina as a civilian employee. I did two tours with Camp Lejeune, spent 6 years of my life living down there. Gunny Nieto's oldest son happened to be on the USS Cole as a sailor. He was one of the sailors that was killed during the terrorist bombing of the USS Cole. Obviously, as a father, he grieved over the loss of his son. One of the ways that he expressed and mourned, if you look at his license plate, his official North Carolina license plate is USS Cole. He had those decals, "We died, they rejoiced." No quarter for Islamic terrorists. Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune banned his vehicle from coming on the base because of those decals. They had gotten a complaint. The Marine Corps installation banned them. They told the gunny, "You either remove those decals or you scrape off your base decal," which is what allows him to go on the military installations. He said, "Sir, I'm not going to remove those decals." So he went out there with the hand scraper and he scraped off the decals. And they issued an order to him that he wasn't allowed to bring that vehicle on any military or federal installation. So he couldn't bring his vehicle back on base where he worked, where he was a retired Marine, had access to all the health care and everything else. He couldn't go visit his son's grave marker at Arlington National Cemetery in that vehicle. He couldn't go down to Virginia to the naval base where the Cole Memorial is because of those decals. I filed a federal civil rights lawsuit on behalf of Gunny Nieto in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of North Carolina, and the judge ruled in our favor. He ordered the base to allow him back on the vehicle. I got to tell you, that was one of the happiest calls I ever made to Gunny Nieto's when I got the word, when he got the electronic notice that the judge ruled against the Camp Lejeune, held that it was viewpoint discrimination. When I called Gunny, I could tell he was teared up and he was crying on the other end of the phone. And this is a combat Marine. It meant so much to him. That picture there is him going back on base with his vehicle. I said, "Gunny, get your vehicle, bring it in front of the Camp Lejeune sign, take some pictures and send it to me." And he did. Here's one of the cases, Pam Geller, Robert Spencer, and AFDI, the American Freedom Defense Initiative, some of David and my favorite clients, because as you know, Pam, she's always soft-spoken and never want to cause any controversy. Love representing Pam. She mentioned this one already. She wanted to run this advertisement on the Detroit buses. And they told her she couldn't. They wouldn't give her a reason why, they just told her she couldn't. It was okay, though, for them to run this advertisement. don't believe in God. So the atheist advertisement is okay. But the one addressing Islam is not okay. And in fact, even this atheist advertisement was vandalized. They had vehicles that were being literally harmed, physically damaged, and yet they just kept putting it back up and they had no problem with it. Well, our federal judge here in Detroit ruled in our favor once again. Told them they had to put the ads up. The Detroit bus agency has still refused to do that, and they've appealed up. The case is out pending before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, but we like our chances. Right now we have an injunction that the judge won't enforce, but we still want, and I fully expect to win on appeal in the Sixth Circuit. Same thing happened in the AFDI versus MTA in New York. Although there was a couple of other frolic and detours in between, down in Miami and one other stop in New York where just the threat of suing them, where they backed down, they allowed the ads to run. But here the the MTA dug in their heels. This was the advertisement Pan wanted to run. As she indicated, the MTA accepted these anti-Israel advertisements, one from a Palestinian group, which essentially said, look, if you're on the side of Palestine in this battle, this Palestinian-Israeli conflict, then you're on the side of justice and you're on the side of peace. So if you're on the side of justice and you're on the side of peace, what's on the other side? Right? It must be unjust. It must be violent. Well, when Pam wanted to run this advertisement, the MTA told him that it was prohibited because it was demeaning speech. Apparently, it's demeaning to call those who engage in violent jihad against innocent Israelis savages. And obviously, that line is from Ayn Rand's book as well, Atlas Shrugged. Well, David and I, we had a 4-hour hearing in a federal court in downtown Manhattan on April 3rd. And after that hearing, I'm pretty convinced, even though we had a pretty hardcore liberal judge, he's going to rule in our favor. In fact, when you have a judge at the end turn to your opposing counsel and say, how much time do you think you're going to need to appeal my ruling? You have a good idea where you're going to stand. You know, as mentioned, American Laws for American Courts, that model legislation was drafted by my colleague, David Urashami. And any time this is brought up, in fact, it's been passed in 3 states, and it's pending in dozens of other states. And any time that American Laws for American Courts shows up in the media or it shows up in any of these legislative halls, immediately you have CARE and the other groups going out there claiming that it's, Islamophobia, it's an attack on Islam, and nothing could be further. And let me give you a little bit of facts, because I know the CARE and these other organizations don't like to deal with facts. American Laws for American Courts was modeled off of federal legislation, which was recently passed. There was this phenom going on called libel tourism, where in foreign countries, they certainly don't, most countries don't have the First Amendment protections like we have. So when people write books like Robert Spencer or Pam Geller and that are expressing opinions that people don't like, in some of these foreign countries, they get sued. They get sued for libel and they get sued for defamation. And what was happening is they would take these foreign judgments, bring them into U.S. courts, and enforce them under these comity principles. Not comedy, comity. And so the federal government finally woke up and they passed legislation saying that if any foreign law or foreign judgment, if it was going to be enforced in our courts, would violate our fundamental right to freedom of speech as protected by the First Amendment, it's null and void and it cannot be used. What David Urashami has done is essentially take that model legislation and expand it. Not so that it is just the First Amendment, but if you have a foreign law or a foreign judgment that wants to be enforced in our state courts that not only violates our First Amendment right to freedom of speech, but violates our right to free exercise of religion, that violates equal protection, that violates due process, it can't be enforced. That is all the law does. It doesn't even mention Sharia. But as one example, in New Jersey, there was a wife, I believe, was trying to get a temporary restraining order from a husband who was treating her very brutally. I don't even want to go into the details of what it was. When he went to the trial court level, his argument to the judge was, look, I'm a Muslim, this is part of my religion, this is part of Sharia, my wife is my property. And the judge ruled in his favor. Thankfully, the case was appealed to the appellate court and it was reversed. The Center for Security Policy, whom we work with very closely, Frank Gaffney, some of you probably know about the tremendous work that they're doing. They have a whole website with all the cases. They did a survey of how the pernicious influence of foreign laws is having an effect on our Constitution and our laws. And all the American laws from American courts does is what it says, is that here in the United States, American law applies. Not Sharia, not any other foreign law, but American laws. And the primary law, the supreme law of our land, is the United States Constitution. As you can see, and I hope I've been able to convey to you today, that this threat, this civilization jihad, is a real threat. It's a real threat not only to our physical safety, as we saw in 9/11, but also to our way of life, to our constitutional freedoms. I'm very proud to be part of these seminars that Pam and Robert have been putting on, because I think they've done more than any two people that I've seen to inform Americans about this threat. And just to wrap it up, I'd like to point out the Center for Security Policy, and Frank Gaffney has put together this education series on the Muslim Brotherhood, and it's a video series that's available to you online. You can go to our website and you can see the first increment of that, but it's critically important that we become aware of what these threats are, and I applaud you as well for spending your Sunday afternoon to listen to us, to hopefully become better educated about these issues and to pass it on. Thank you again for your time.